And welcome to the US Embassy Literature Series here at English Theatre Berlin. I'm Günter Grosser, the artistic director here. We have Brittani Sonnenberg tonight. She's going to read from her novel Home Leave. Arche McGill from the American Academy will moderate the evening. This is the German translation, Heimflug, it just came out. Arche Verlag. Brittani will be happy to sign it after the show. You can purchase it out there. Don't forget to turn on your mobile after the reading and enjoy.
Thank you for coming. I guess I don't have to lean in, the microphone's good. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Arche McGill. I'm the editor of the Berlin Journal at the American Academy. That's on Wannsee. And I'll give you a quick sequence of events tonight. I'm going to introduce Brittani real quick. Then she's going to introduce her book and tell you a little bit about it, and then do a reading for about half an hour. Then I will ask questions, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions afterwards. I have a personal connection to Brittani. We worked together at the American Academy from 2011 to 2013, where she used to be the editor of the Berlin Journal. And we became very close friends, so this is a highly not awkward interview tonight because we are pals. So here's a quick bio. Brittani Sonnenberg is the author of the novel Home Leave, published by Grand Central in the US, Arche Verlag in Germany, and AST in Russia. Sonnenberg has an MFA from the University of Michigan and lives in Berlin, where she's a frequent contributor to Berlin Stories on National Public Radio. She's currently a visiting lecturer at the MFA program of the University of Hong Kong, and her award-winning fiction has been widely published in magazines such as Plowshares, anthologized in the O. Henry Short Story Prize series, and received distinguished story recognition by American Short Stories. Her nonfiction has been published by Time Magazine, the Associated Press, NPR, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and elsewhere. She studied English literature with a citation in Mandarin Chinese at Harvard University, and she was a European Journalism Fellow at Berlin's Freie Universität from 2009 to 2010. And as I mentioned, she was the editor of the Berlin Journal from 2011 to 2013. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Brittani Sonnenberg.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming out on this chilly, freezing, literally freezing December night, the 1st of December. Thank you, Arche, for that intro. Thank you to Martina Cole and to the US Embassy for sponsoring this series, and to the English Theatre Berlin, and to Asha, my publisher here. I really appreciate all of your support. I just wanted to say a couple words about the novel before I go into the reading, to give you a little bit of context. So, Home Leave is about an American family that moves all over the world because of the father's global business career. So they go from Atlanta to Hamburg to Philadelphia to London, back to Atlanta, then to Madison, Wisconsin, then to Shanghai, then to Singapore. And all of these moves result in a very shaky sense of what the Germans would call Heimat for this family, especially for the two little girls, Sophie and Leah. And that's, maybe you guys are familiar with a term, third culture kids. Those are children who grow up kind of all over the place, not necessarily where their parents are from, and something that I explore quite a bit in this book. And so the first chapter, the excerpt I'm going to read is from the middle of the book. It's when the family moves to Shanghai. And this is 1993, and Shanghai is not exactly the booming metropolis that we think of it today. It's kind of pre-McDonald's, and old folks still walking around in mouse suits and things like that. And the family has quite a surprise. And Sophie and Leah, the two daughters, in this chapter, Sophie is 10 years old and Leah is 12. The People's Square, Shanghai, China, 1993. Those first days, we were awoken by the sounds of ballroom dance music at dawn. Old tunes from the 50s, like Jailhouse Rock, along with waltzes and tangos. This is exactly why I said I'd never live in an apartment building again, Mom told Dad on our third morning in Shanghai. Remember the Schmitz in Hamburg? The parties they would throw? You were just mad they never invited you, he said. They ruined John Denver, Mom said, ignoring him. You could always tell a party was winding up when Country Road started playing over and over. Hey, Sophie interrupted. It stopped. We all listened. She was right. The apartment was silent, except for the refrigerator whir and a distant whine of traffic. Then What a Wonderful World started up. That's it, Mom said, and stormed out. 5 minutes later, she came back, mystified. It's not the neighbors, she said. I think it's coming from outside. We all crowded onto the balcony. It was just after 7, and the sun had barely risen. I stayed close to the door because I didn't like heights, and our apartment was on the 30th floor. Mom was right. The music was coming from the street. It had to be deafening down there because it was still loud when it got up to us. Over there, maybe? Mom pointed vaguely across the street. I can see it there in front of the big building. Sophie's voice was shrill with triumph. Of the two of us, she always spotted things first, but only because she was obsessed with winning. Technically, I had the better eyesight, a fact proven each time we went to the doctor for eye exams, which drove her crazy. Down there, she yelled, even though we were right beside her. They're dancing. We had already begun to say they to refer to them, i.e. the locals, the Shanghainese, the not us. Those first weeks were full of, what do you think they're yelling about? And are they pointing at us? Dad looked at his watch. I need to run. Can we go down there, Mom? Sophie asked. I have to check this out. Mom looked at me. I'll keep an eye on her, I said. Like I need it, Sophie scoffed and went after her sneakers. Take the swipe card to the apartment building, Mom said, fishing through her purse in the living room. Here's the apartment key. If they look upset that you're there, come back up right away. Maybe it's closed to foreigners. Mom, I rolled my eyes. Come on, it's a public square. The People's Square, remember? We'd learned that much from a short tour around the neighborhood the previous day, led by one of Dad's employees. Sophie and I had spent the half hour giggling and poking each other whenever we saw stuff like the neat rips in Chinese toddlers' pants, so they could do their business anywhere, or how people spat on the street as casually as if they were blowing their nose into a Kleenex. Back in our neighborhood in Atlanta, Sophie had been something of a spitting legend. She could spit as far and aim as well as any of the boys. This is my kind of country, she had whispered to me, watching an elderly lady let one sail across the sidewalk, prompting Dad to turn around and shush us. Yeah, the People's Square, Sophie called now from the hallway, as in all people, including Americans. Hello. That elongated hello was a new tic of hers, something she had picked up during our 6 months in Madison that I wish she hadn't. Come on, Leah, before they're gone. She was out the door. Mom smiled ruefully at me. Careful crossing the street, she said. I laughed obligingly. It was our family's first inside China joke, since we'd nearly gotten run over every time we'd attempted to cross the street in the past 2 days. Deal, I said. I liked my wise older sister role, which had somehow fallen on me with the move. I gave Mom a tired, grown-up-looking smile in return. I dropped the smile as soon as I left our apartment. Sophie was in the elevator, holding the doors, which had begun to squawk in protest. What took you so long? She demanded. I hurled myself inside just before the door shut. The Shanghai air hit us as soon as we left the lobby of our apartment building. Dusty and smelly. We giggled at it, like one of us had farted. Let's go, Sophie said, all urgency, and grabbed my hand. We tore down the sidewalk. There was something about being stared at in China that made you either want to go hide under the covers or do something crazy, like scream and sprint down the street. When Sophie was there with me, I often had the latter impulse. We managed to cross the street, dodging raging bikes and honking cars, and reached the People's Square, where we slowed down, suddenly shy. We were in a sea of senior citizens. Most of them were dancing to Twist Again, but some of them were off to the side, doing random moves with swords. Another pack, farther to the back, looked like somebody had pressed a slow motion button on them. I punched Sophie in the arm and pointed, but she didn't even turn around. She was so caught up with the dancers. After the song, everybody clapped, including Sophie and me. I wandered away from her to get a better look at the geezers in slow motion until I heard an outraged "Hey!" behind me. I whirled around. Sophie was holding the back of her head like she'd been hit. "What happened?" I asked, pulling her to the side as the old people around us began a slow tango. We kept getting knocked by elbows and hips and received multiple annoyed looks and old people mutters of disapproval. "That lady just came up and touched my hair," Sophie said, jerking her head back in the direction we'd come from. "Let's get out of here. It's dumb." "Hold on a second. I want to check out those slow people over there. I said let's go." I had never seen Sophie cry, except in photos when we were really little. But it was in her voice now, all right. Okay, take a chill pill." I scanned the crowd, looking for a path through the spinning bodies. "You first." The next incident occurred 3 weeks later on a trip to Suzhou with Dad's company. It was a disaster from the beginning. Dad's colleagues picked us up in a van, and the driver put in a Michael Jackson CD before we had even left the parking lot. One of the most annoying things about living in Shanghai, I had already discovered, was how Chinese people always expected you to be in love with everything American, just because you came from there. I'd always hated Michael Jackson, and hearing him now made me hate him even more. We got stuck in traffic, so what was supposed to be a 2-hour trip took 3 hours. When the CD was through, the driver just played it from the beginning again. "Torture," I mouthed to Sophie, and she mimed dying a slow death in the back seat, which made me laugh out loud, and Mom shot us a "quit it" look. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee, the wife of Dad's joint venture partner, who didn't speak English but still wouldn't leave us alone, kept plying us with disgusting local snacks. First, she tried feeding us prunes covered with salt and a sourish orange powder, as if prunes themselves weren't gross enough. Barf. I spit it out in a tissue to Mom's everlasting embarrassment. Next up was a packet of tiny dried fish, bones and eyes still intact, which stank up the whole van like a pet food store. Double barf. When Mrs. Lee finally brought out the bananas, which looked like Twix bars in comparison to all the other crap, Sophie and I readily agreed to one, our first mistake. Between the drivers twisting his head around, looking for us to sing along to Billie Jean, and Mrs. Lee stuffing more bananas in our hands, Sophie and I looked like a low-budget circus act. I glanced at Mom, staring out the window absent-mindedly, enjoying the rice fields flying by, and suddenly felt furious. Now I saw why she'd wanted us along, to be deflectors, so she wouldn't have to deal with Mrs. Lee. Convenient. "I think my mom wants a banana," I told Mrs. Lee politely, and turned on my Walkman as the translator translated my words. After that, Mary Chapin Carpenter drowned out Michael Jackson, and I relaxed, transported back to my bedroom in Atlanta, where I'd listened to Shooting Straight in the Dark 1,000,000 times. With the headphones on, the translator couldn't ask me about my favorite school subjects, or whether I agreed that Chinese food was the best food in the world. I could see Mom mouthing, "teenage moment," to Sophie in the back seat. But it wasn't a teenage moment. I didn't mean to act like a teenager. I didn't feel like a teenager. I didn't like band posters or lipstick or making friendship bracelets for other girls. I didn't think listening to your Walkman fell in that category. It was all about survival, about not feeling awful. Mom and Dad had moved us halfway around the world. The least we deserved was the right to take personal timeouts until we were ready to go back in the game. And sure enough, 3 songs later, I felt a little bit better and even finished my banana like a good foreigner. When we arrived in Suzhou, we piled out of the van and went straight to a restaurant, even though we were already stuffed. Dad was the only one of us who ate the drunken prawns at lunch, which are exactly like they sound and which turned me vegetarian, at least for the rest of the day. Dad would do anything to make his Chinese business partners think he was a good guy, even eat an innocent, flailing, boozed-up shrimp. Then it was time for a tour of Suzhou in the rain, with a translator who could barely speak English. His accent was so thick. Mom would say I wasn't being fair or sympathetic of cultural differences, but I honestly tried listening at the beginning, and I couldn't make out a word. I put my headphones back on and avoided eye contact with Mom. Sophie came over to me in the middle of the Suzhou Museum and tried to get me to give her a listen. No way. It was in the next room, full of long scrolls of Chinese characters, that it happened. We should have known better when we saw the room fill with Chinese kids, all decked out in bright red scarves and blue baseball caps, like they were going to the World Series. Basically, when they saw Sophie, they freaked out. I guess I was too tall for them, above their sightlines or something. But they went for Sophie like yellow jackets to strawberry jam. They all wanted to touch her hair. Mr. and Mrs. Lee were smiling and laughing about it like proud grandparents, and Dad was looking at them, smiling too. But I could tell Mom was worried, and suddenly Sophie screamed super loud, "Get off me!" and booked it out of the room. I ran after her and had to run for a while. She sprinted out of the museum, down the road, people pointing and laughing, and then headed for a small park, where there was a pond with no one there, because it was still raining. When I got there, she was crying, and I mean crying. I didn't really know what to do. I put an arm around her and she shoved me away. "You let them come," she said. "You were laughing." That wasn't true, and I told her so. It unnerved me to see Sophie so upset. Between the two of us, she had always been the braver one, even though I was older, which was embarrassing. If we went to camp together, it was she who hung out with the popular kids and braided the counselors' hair and gave them back massages, while I sat in the shadows of the campfire burning my marshmallows. It was Sophie who told me that Santa Claus didn't exist, and it was Sophie who could read scary books before going to bed and watch Indiana Jones without running out of the room, unlike yours truly. So this was a new side to her, and even though it pained me to see her so down, there was a tiny part of me that was thrilled to finally be the tough older sister. "I hate them," she said. "They're just dumb kids." "Why didn't they go after you?" "I guess because I don't have your perfect blonde curls," I said, which came out a little more bitter than I'd intended it to. I'd always been jealous of Sophie's hair. It was the same shade as Mom's. But now I felt pretty smug about my iron straight hair. We stood there for a while, just watching the pond. There were a couple of ducks paddling around, looking depressed, surrounded by paper cups, cigarettes, and plastic wrappers. "China sucks," said Sophie. I knew she was waiting for me to agree, but for some reason I held back and stayed quiet. "What's the first thing you would buy at Kroger's?" I finally asked her. "A Butterfinger," she said immediately. "You?" A box of Honey Bunches of Oats." Weirdo. We walked back, me humming the Honey Bunches of Oats theme song. It made me feel invincible, as though by summoning up the memory of the cereal commercial, a cartoon farmer walking through his wheat field, singing, birds flying down to join him, everything else, the rock gardens, the heavy museum doors, the echoing rooms, our parents frowning, was only half there, half real. Okay, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit now.
Fiction, it's not even a travelogue disguised as fiction, because the multiple narrators that happen in the book, important to know also is that the father narrates, the mother narrates, the deceased sister narrates, a house narrates, Brittany's character narrates, so you get all these different perspectives that are happening, not every single chapter in a predictable way, but sort of where, when the character fits the narration, you get the trajectory of the story through those eyes, which is makes for a great read. But what I wanted to ask is, you as a writer still have this one perspective, obviously, that you're driving forward. So my very basic question is, how has living overseas and in all these different places, because you've been writing for a long time now, influenced your mental habits? What kind of behaviors has it instilled in you as a writer, really? I mean, you don't have one spot all the time. You've been working on this book for a long time, and how have you brought that all together, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when I was in 7th grade, so one thing I didn't say, but maybe you've kind of ascertained, is that my family also moved all over the place. And so this book is loosely autobiographical, or as my mom would want me to say, 99% fiction. But there's a lot that holds true from my own experience. And so when I lived in Shanghai, I got an assignment from my 7th grade language arts teacher to write a travel article about Shanghai. And so I went around town with a notebook and was trying to sort of think of things to come up with. And I noticed that when I had that notebook in my hand, it was sort of a magical experience in that I felt like it was a kind of cloak, because I was suddenly staring and trying to come up and write down details as much as I could, instead of feeling like I was the one being stared at. And that feeling that I was the observer and that a lot was going on that I could write about, that I suddenly had agency instead of feeling like a freak, basically, because I was as tall then as I am now, and long red hair, and it just really transformed my feeling of foreignness, that suddenly being an outsider was a way to gain perspective on something, and China's foreignness was something I could be curious about instead of afraid of. And so I think ever since that time, writing has been a kind of coping mechanism for me in foreign countries, and just a way to stay really curious. And then when I was thinking about tackling my own story or my own history, I think I felt the way I did about writing about China in some ways, like to be curious again about your own past. You have to enter it as a foreigner a little bit, or as a stranger. And so that's why those different perspectives, like writing from a house, or from my dad's perspective, or from a mother's perspective, really opened me up to sort of being able to tell new stories and not just ones the way I had experienced our travels.
And do you have to put yourself in a certain mindset when you say, okay, or are there specific kinds of mindsets that you say, I'm going to go back now to being 14 or 11 or something, or specific places, like going back to the South or going back to Shanghai? Do those feel different internally? When you sort of set them up, or not only feel different, but do they come out differently when you actually write them? Because I imagine, some of the parts about the South are really funny, and do they feel different for you when you approach them?
Yeah, to a certain. When I was writing in college, which is where I sort of first seriously started writing fiction, I guess I would be really into sort of a method acting approach to short stories. So I would put Balinese music on really loud in my room and turn on the heat and walk around in a kind of Balinese muumuu. And my roommates were generally horrified by that behavior, but it kind of helped me leave Boston behind and re-enter Southeast Asia. But it required a lot of costumes and props, and it was kind of an expensive heating bill. And so I've sort of switched to less complicated methods. I think especially your own experience, if you hear a song, to this day, whenever I hear Boys to Men, I just want to lie in a fetal position on the floor, because it reminds me of like not being asked to dance at school dances when I was 13. But it's just like there are all these memories that feel all too close, or just that are there at your beck and call in some ways because they were very powerful, or you can re-enter them fairly and sometimes a little too easily. So, yeah.
Since you brought up Sophie, I wanted to bring up to ask you, as a writer, what kind of moral feelings arose when you inhabited Sophie, basically? And again, I'm not asking you personally, but as a writer, because that's a distinct decision to say, now I'm going to do this, which is the most painful part. Was that more difficult than inhabiting some of the other characters?
I think I wrote the book because I wanted to write about this. Mm-hmm. So I think it was clear from the beginning that, I'd been writing stories that were told from the perspective of Chinese people who had lost their houses when the government had kicked them out, or who had experienced loss during the Cultural Revolution, or a Malaysian innkeeper who'd lost his best friend. I felt like I'd been hovering around the material for a long time. and I felt a strong urge just to kind of to tell the story that had happened to me and look at it very closely rather than kind of put on masks. And so it felt like that was the project to take that on.
She was at the center somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.